Hello and welcome to another episode of Facilitating Software Design and Architecture. And this time we've got Xin with us, who's, I'm sure, got a super exciting story to share with us. And I'm Andrew Harmel-Law, and I'm here with my co-conspirators, Andrea Magnorski and Kenny Bosch-Regler. Over to you, Xin.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this first episode of the new year, 2026. I'm really excited. So today, I think I'm going to tell two stories related about architecture enabling. I'm going to tell them short and sweet, and then I look forward to having a conversation about it with you rather than, just giving you my learning points. So I hope it's going to be fun for you as well. Right. So for as long as I can remember, I've been this kind of a fixer. Everybody knows me as a person that can fix things, especially complex architecture stuff. So I've been in this boundary spanning role for maybe 15 years at least. The first story I'm going to tell is at that time, there was no enabling architect. The role didn't exist. So I've been part of something called a flying squad. So flying squad is kind of like if you have a fire, then you fly people in from the flying squad to put out the fire. And in this case, I was the integration architect from the flying squad. And the thing is that I was working for this big financial institution. And also at that time, there was no legacy modernization. So the background is that this institution, this bank, has decided to buy a new CRM system to replace, actually, as a new system to enable some new processes for their business banking and corporate and institution customers. And because there was no knowledge sharing at that time, at that point, you see all these account managers, they put their knowledge literally in shoeboxes. There's no knowledge sharing. So because of this thing, they're only using the system for corporate banking and business banking. There's a whole private sector that is not moving to the system. The complexity is kind of big. And people need to find out a way to basically design a integration architecture that can make this work, make the business process work. So my job back then was to summon all the teams that are going to be involved in supporting this integration project into a multi-day workshop fashion. It's kind of offsite and really dedicated. And so it's kind of like all the core banking systems, because for the data to go into the new CRM system, you need the credit data, you need the customer data, you need the account, you need the 360 view for every customer. And sometimes if you are a small business customer, you are also a private customer, personal customer. So there is kind of this complex business complexity as well. So the business people have to be involved as well. So it's kind of a cross-functional and a lot of teams and a kind of like a prestige kind of gathering. So my role is actually to facilitate kind of a decision toward the target architecture, target integration architecture, both from the business process perspective and the data integration perspective. And it went very well. I did my data gathering, did a lot of focus group interviews up front. And in the workshop, there were dedicated knowledge sharing from different teams for the hotspot areas for people to get a fair understanding. And we basically drew up a sort of a big service blueprint from above the visibility line all the way down to the data integration. It all went very well from my perspective. And people were very much playing along and so forth. And so we had the discussion about, we don't want this new project, this new initiative to become an opportunity to add into even more integration points, because back then, there are a lot of custom integration solutions. We call them system integrators. We want to do APIs and we want to reuse and all that. So all the event-driven, all the API enablement was also part of that initiative. These are the principles and so forth. So we had a integration architecture lined out in different areas. And then we had the um, at that time it was the beginning of I think the ADR was Michael Nygaard coined it in 2007,
popularized it.
and that was to
Yep.
popularized.
Ruth Mallon corrected
So-
my book because I said he invented it, and Ruth said no, someone in the 80s invented
Oh,
it.
okay.
Michael wrote a blog.
I had the same perception,
too.
but
Yeah.
it was 2013 at that time.
Yeah.
I remember it because that's the year when my son was born. We tried to use it, and people were quite impressed about that process and so forth. Then we ended those 3 days with a long action list because a lot of people need to do a lot of things and balancing priorities and so forth. So the team leads all went back and so forth. So that seems to be a story with no, twists and turns. But the feedback came maybe 4 weeks later. And because I wasn't part of any of these teams, I was the flying squad. So when the managers got together in a looking back meeting, and there was we found out, yeah, we aligned, everybody agreed. And we even did I remember we drew a line. On one side, it's yes, and I support this, I'm totally on board. On the other is yes, but. And then most of the people put their dots on the yes, and. So it was kind of, we all aligned. 4 weeks later, we found out nobody did it. The action list was basically like, yeah, what's happening? What's happening? And I couldn't understand because I put in a lot of hard work. I was the one key facilitator and so forth. And then there was this one annoying manager. He is an engineering manager, and he was just like, hey, I think everybody agreed, everybody was supportive. But did you notice anybody was excited about it? She's like, no, there was no excitement. There was no excitement. Everybody was playing the game. Nobody wanted to say so not microservice back then, it's API is bad. Nobody wanted to say event-driven is bad. Nobody wanted to say, I don't want to be part of this. And it was a top-down orchestrated show. It's a success theater. And for me, so that was my personal learning point at that time, very simplistic. So that was story one. And then, we also did a lot of domain modeling because I was also all jazz about DDD. That was the year when Vernon's book came out. At least that was the year when I read it. I was just like, okay, all jazz about that as well. Then the following years was in the sign of event storming and a collaborative modeling. So I was just like convinced that if we did collaborative modeling, that would be a game changer. Those workshops would have become a total success. Then fast forward 7 years later, just in the middle of COVID, I did a similar exercise. I was no longer part of the flying squad. I was the DDD evangelist, another enabling role in an event storming workshop for a cherry-picked core domain in a transformation project for the same organization. So it was collaborative modeling. Everybody was contributing. There was not so much contribution in the first workshop. It was all pre-orchestrated. And this time it's all real time and so forth, right? And people put on the sticky note. But then when we were supposed to merge the timeline, hell break loose. Because I basically I was just like, the energy was so high when people wrote all those sticky notes. After merging the timeline, which is like, I still saw those clusters. Like, people didn't want to merge their timeline. And so after a lot of persuading, out of a lot of convincing, I was just like saying, oh, okay, we didn't have to do it perfect, and this is an experiment, it's iterative, let's just do this. So we got kind of a timeline merged. Hallelujah, that was half a day. The time we were totally, exceeding the time frame I was allocating for. Usually merging the timeline wasn't hard. People were just having a little discussion and so forth. But then in the afternoon after lunch, the brain was already a little used, and then we were supposed to do the explicit walkthrough. And then in the best collaborative modeling fashion, I did an example, and then I encouraged people to take over. The people who took over had a hard time harmonizing the different inputs, and there were a lot of questions, a lot of really polite, but really a lot of questions. They couldn't continue. So at one point, one person said to me, Xin, nobody had your skills. You have to take over if we want to proceed. In fact, the architect of the team said that. So I had to took over, and then in the end, we ended up with more hotspots than the orange sticky notes. Literally, if you look at the board, the picture, it was more red than orange, because that was kind of like, okay, Alberto has this rush to the goal. You need to see the forest before you can see the trees. So we just keep encouraging people to say, let's for whatever effort that it needs, let's construct the forest. And then at the end of the day, we couldn't do the value thing in the end. There was no time. And I could feel there was something missing, but I didn't want to go there because it's supposed to work. All other event storming sessions work. Why couldn't this one work? The next point, because we had a big DDD roadmap, the next point is the DDD bounded context canvas. I had no bounded context candidates, and I was very much antsy about it. So the day ended really not well. And that's the second story. And it ended by a retrospective when I was actually asking people in the day afterwards, to do a retrospective. And people were actually very frank with me. One person, I remember this one there were several comments. I think one is, we only see trees, no forests, because that was my mantra. Another person said, the whiteboard doesn't compile, because my passion about event storming is that at the end of the day, you almost have a whiteboard that compiles, right? You have this cadence. And he was like saying, it doesn't compile. Then I had an individual conversation afterwards with these two people. And I found out it's one of the reasons is because the precondition for this whole event storming was the entry and exit event was decided by the domain architects. And they didn't really agree. The team didn't really agree with the entry and exit events. And the architect was in the meeting, was in the workshop. So nobody wanted to go there, a lot of questions and so forth. And it was, again, this thing. And I'm just like, it is so easy to have, why didn't nobody tell me, right? And then I asked the second person who there was a third one saying, that girl said, you were too in love with your model. I said, why didn't anybody say anything? Because at that time I already got this information. She said, we all respected you. You had so much passion. You had so much energy. We didn't want to ruin it for you. And we wanted also to make it work. So that was what I got. That was the second story. There was a longer ending to the story, but I wanted to stop here. I think it's already been long. There's a lot of learning, but I want to invite you to tell me, what is your immediate reaction? What are you thinking? There's way more data than I was having time to share, but you had some impressions, so tell me.
One that strikes me, because I've felt this, is like, and I think you almost exactly said this, right? Sometimes you need to do a big thing, and then you put a lot of effort into the big thing, and then everyone comes to the big thing. And because it's a big thing, and everyone knows it's important, everybody's terrified to say maybe the big thing isn't working. Because I feel that all the time. It's terrifying. Yeah. So do you think there's, from lessons that you've learned, do you think there's any ways to because I've seen Alberto, when he's done it with me, he talks about playing event storming. So he's trying to reduce the, we're just going to have fun. It doesn't matter if it succeeds or not, which I, for a long time, didn't realize how important that was. But if you've got any lessons learned, things that you've realized maybe would help.
Yeah.
If you were going to do it again.
I can totally, that's really a lot of resonating there. And I think that since 2020, I'm still on my own leading edge of understanding and growing from all this. So there's a couple of things. One is that these days, so the fun part is really an element, but if you look behind the fun, I think that is kind of like to say, in the beginning, instead of to say, I'm the enabling architect, I'm here to tell you what the right way to do this is. These days, I tend to say, I'm here to share some stuff, some shit I know. But I am on the same learning journey. I'm probably just a couple of steps ahead of you. I'm not there, so I don't want you to trust me for any of this. I want you to trust your own experience. So, but in the next whatever, how many days, I want you to have an open mind for what I'm telling you. Give it a fair chance. But whether it works or whether it's not, it's up to you. So it's kind of like taking the authority, taking the I am here to fix you thing a little bit out of the picture. That's one thing that has worked. The other thing is inviting dissent from the very beginning. Basically, I have a heuristic for my side. If I have shown people maybe 4 or 5 slides of something, or I've used at least 10 minutes to tell something, I have to pause and I have to say, what are your doubts and concerns? If you didn't have to be polite, what would you say? Any of this stuff is totally useless from your current point of view. And if you're feeling the need to scroll on your phone, and if you're disengaging. So it's kind of like that. Also to basically invite, get that data that entry and exit events really didn't work. We could have saved a lot of time. So those are the 2 things that popped into my mind. Yeah.
There is a common thread in the 2 stories, which is kind of what I think you're saying. Hey, I'm going to give the 2 stories. What do you say? And what I'm sensing here is that you are trying to learn about how to present yourself at the same time with in a way that kind of you're basically stuff, right? And you're trying to facilitate, and facilitation is about enabling collaboration, right? So you're trying to do that. Bring your technical know-how, your social system building know-how to this facilitative, both of those exercises. But how to do that and stay kind of able to be excited yourself, and at the same time get the feedback from what is happening in the room and from people when it's not working. And sometimes, for example, when you were talking about, especially the brainstorming one, I kind of was like, okay, for me, for my heuristics for the board is more pink or red than orange is we don't have the knowledge in the room or the setup is wrong. And then you went like, well, they just went along with the setup. And I was like, okay. Okay, I was like, okay, it's nice to see that we ended up in a similar place. But I think facilitation is hard. It's an underrated skill. It's extremely hard to learn unless you're doing it a lot. So it's like
Doing it all of wrong.
Yeah. This, I think it's true. And sometimes we are, maybe as facilitators, a little bit too over enthusiastic about the technique, the methodology, event storming, domain storytelling, the format. And sometimes when there is I think we know, if we are really living in the moment, we sense there is a high stake, high sensitivity topic that wants to get out, but we don't go there sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because your story reminds me of, I've dealt with the same situation. And then I dived into deep democracy, and they say if you want to go fast, first you need to slow down. It's also what Hein's now saying with their decision making, right? But first you want to go into the conflict. Looking back at the first session as well, right? In both sessions, there was a decision being made, and that's always interesting, right? Every time there's an autocratic decision, resistance will start to pop up, especially, there's a nuance to it. If people agree with the decision, it's fine, but you can bet in a big group that not everyone's right. And the first decision is like, we're going to do this to get to this point. And the second one was like, we're going to use these events. So these were already predisposed decisions being made. And that causes resistance to pop up, right? Either people stay quiet, or if you think back at that moment, and it's always very hard to reflect on this because you basically usually don't see it. If you didn't see it then, it's very hard to reflect on it, what happened, right? But can you still think to a moment back there where you think, oh, now I understand why this behavior keep popping up, right? Did something notice you like, oh, if I just dived into these patterns that I'm seeing, do you think that would help? I'm very curious if there was something in your mind like, yeah, now I understand.
I think if you ask me what did I notice and didn't act on during the session, I think what I noticed is that my own anxiety. So it's neurologically my own anxiety of not producing the outcome. I think the team deserved a part of my identity as well, because I'm there to enable. What am I to enable if there's not an outcome at all, right? So that fear, that amygdala in my brain basically prevented my empathizing mechanism to take action on the undiscussable, the thing. I have a very I'm a female, and I have a very high sensitivity toward things not going right. I knew there's this thing, but I didn't touch it because I knew that I have this masculine part. I'm an architect. I am supposed to be outcome driven. I have the responsibility for this and that, and for reaching the timeline and all that. So all these, there's never. I think sometimes we have to be careful about these heuristic and patterns. Sometimes, the moment we lock our mind into one pattern or one heuristic, say this is what's going wrong and this is what's going right, we are excluding all the other things. And all of us, the four of us, all think we are systems thinkers, right? What is a system? It means more than one factor is at play, even contradicting things at the same time. And so I think it's really important that we don't let our own models trap us and prison us and keep us in the safety trap.
One thing I noticed, so this is the biggest paradox for architects starting to facilitate. You say I'm outcome driven, so you're tied to the outcome, while you said I'm very empathic. The group wanting something else, while you wanted to go to the outcome. That can be a paradox that I think every architect starts to facilitate is going to deal with that. And that's a hard choice. There's no right answer here. But I think that's very important for other architects to understand. Is as the moment you're going to do this, you're going to deal with this paradox of, hey, I have this outcome and responsibility to take, but I noticed that the group needs something different. How are we going to deal with that? So I just wanted to say that.
I think it's I just want to comment briefly on that. I think it's with the dominance of AI and with all these things, I think the enabling architecture piece, if somebody has the passion and the sense of mission to enable others, we have to go there. We have to go and explore what is enabling. Enabling is not to, over transfer skills from me to you to anybody who doesn't know it. AI can do that much better than we do. What we enable is a capacity to navigate complexity. Otherwise, why us? They can go somewhere else, tutorials and whatever, right? So that's just a short comment.
I think that's a very good comment. And also wanted to ask you, when you're talking about these two examples, it seems to me that you're asking, what could I have done different? And I want to ask you a different question, which is, what if the outcome is that what happens would have happened no matter what you do, because that's what the room needed to do? Like, I think that when you're facilitating something, there are times when no matter what you do, you can't give, let's say, for example, people the capability to speak about things they don't feel safe speaking because you're one person. So what if the problem wasn't you and how you facilitate it, but something else? And in that case, what is the problem? Let's put a different model in the question.
Oh, wow. That's such a good question, Andrea. Thank you for that. First of all, I think, that question was my initial, my initial mind patterns. What could I have done differently? These days, I don't think like that anymore. I don't regret anything that happened, because if it didn't happen, I wouldn't have learned. And a lot of people have taken a lot of learning points. I don't know other people's learning journey. So that's the first part. Sometimes, even I'm working with my somebodyness, because right now, if you are lead architect, you're always in this role, enabling architect. You have this somebodyness in you. I'm special. I'm whatever. And then that somebodyness will somehow, it's a very destructive capacity in some context. The second part about the question is that what if whatever you did, it would still have happened? Yeah, it could. I mean, it's a complex world. But I think this is a question to all of us as conveners of gatherings, as groups. I think we have a responsibility. There is always something more we can explore to me, a group with co-creative dynamics is not a collection of people individually contributing knowledge. How do we tap into that potential is the responsibility of the convener, disregarding if you're an architect or not. I think there's always something that I could have done to make that convening role more effective. My mental model right now, there's 3 circles. I have collaboration in the middle. So if I want to make a group collaboration work the best way possible, I need 3 other C's: connection, contribution, and conversation. If there's no connection, if there's no trust built from the very beginning, anything you say or do doesn't matter at all. The connection is not only between the people, but also between the people to the purpose of that gathering, and the connection from the person to him or herself. What can we do so that people can just share a little bit more of their truth, right? Without feeling that it's damaging for them. There's always something more we can do. That's the connection bit. The contribution is what's missing, because if people don't contribute, they will give you lip service, like in my first example. And resistance is another piece. What's the best way to deal with resistance? My humble opinion right now is that contribution. If you feel that there's a person resisting, I think Peter Block once said, in therapy, the moment you know you have a breakthrough is when the patient says no. If you can't say no, your yes has no meaning, basically. And that's the power of contribution. How do you do this? Through conversations. I think we have to be able to model the conversation seriously to make collaboration work. So just briefly.
There's this Dutch anthropologist. He says resistance is a very interesting metaphor. It came from Freud. Well, of course, it comes from electronics, but Freud said, my patients, these are patients who have psychotherapy, right? They're usually people in therapy. They're resisting my therapy. That's where resistance came from. And now we're going to use it as a word to describe someone who doesn't agree with us. And we need to reframe that resistance is not resistance. It's just someone else's opinion.
Yeah, it's actually a creative energy, I just feel, I don't know who said it. Someone said behind every complaint, there is a yearning. That
Yes.
I would rather have complaint and loud-spoken resistance than lip service, right? I would rather have the second workshop than the first. The collaborative modeling did give me something after 7 years. It wasn't a lost game. It triggered a lot of the things that didn't happen in the first one. So it's a win. The question is, how do we tap into that energy? I think the first thing for us as facilitators or conveners is how to invite people and not to in a persuading role. The enabling word is very dangerous in a way, because if I'm enabling DDD, right? I'm telling people, I know, maybe I don't know what the destination is, but I know how you get there. This is the way I'm enabling you to do, right? And if you challenge that, it's my identity you're challenging. So how do we relax? How do we be able to, how can we say, okay, I don't care if it's not the thing. We don't do DDD, even if I'm a DDD evangelist. In fact, I want to say that the second part, the trailer of that story I didn't finish telling, is that I continued DDD work with that team. But in the 2 weeks that followed, we dropped all methodologies. We whiteboarded everything. We freestyled everything. And that worked wonder. Because that brought me from the pedestal to the same floor level as the team. Let's not use DDD as intimidating whatever.
That's, I think, the biggest problem of DDD, right? Like it feels like this gigantic thing with all of these words and phrases and history and things you need to know. And to be honest, there's a tiny bit at the center which is important. And like you said, that's the thing that goes into code, and everything else is just fancy extra stuff on top of it. But people get very kind of threatened by it or something, or push back and resist against it. Or
Go
One
ahead.
thing you said that in your opinion, the best way to deal with resistance is contribution, and I think that is extremely important, and also my experience of it. So, one thing that I find useful for enabling contribution, especially of the people, because some people can be strongly against you, but also extremely quiet. Because that's just not their style or whatever. So it's always about trying to find the ways to get people showing some of the work aside. I generally don't, when you go somewhere new, I tend to not talk about any of the tech unless you're doing training, and to say, we're doing this. What is it? It's the sticky notes with events. Just put another one, it's like an event.
Guerrilla
That's
event
it, that's
storming.
the end.
I've done some guerrilla event storming. Did we just do event storming? We did. Storming. You don't say the whole.
But no, I think we all know that here. But one of the things is finding the way to get the contributions and to kind of fill the room and meet the people in the room wherever they're at. And if that means that you need to go and do live, like we have whiteboards, boxes and arrows. Cool. That's it. That's where you're at. And that's what works. But sometimes it can be something else. So I think it's not said enough that resistance can be done with contribution. And contribution can have a lot of shapes.
Yeah,
What-
totally.
What I try to do, learning from these Dutch anthropologists, Danielle, they wrote the book Corporate Tribe. It's an interesting book. It's an anthropology. And it goes also into deep democracy. And what they say is in their check-in, they try to challenge the initial purpose. Have the mantra of Dr. House, everyone lies. So when a manager or someone else comes to me and says, this is what the team really needs. I say, sure. And the first thing I do in a session is actually challenge that. Who agrees and who doesn't agree? So that's what you're saying, I think, Xin, right? Inviting the contribution. The first thing I would do is, even if it's a training, I say, who wants to be at this training and who doesn't want to be at this training? And people are like, why are you asking that second question? I say, well, I might not want to be there because I have a sick cat at home, right? That's important maybe because, I don't know. But then the trainer says, but what if these people don't want to be here? I say, we have a good conversation. And afterwards, that why you're inviting people to a collaborative session or a training and they don't want to learn. I think you should first deal with that fact before inviting me to give this training. So that's what I had the same thing happening to me, Xin. And then what you're saying is I started digging deeper, and that's the first thing I learned. Oh, yeah, sure. Of course, I need to challenge the proposition of the session before we actually do the session. That was a learning key.
Yeah, I think even I have seen you do it in your session, Kenny, as well. So you made it feel very safe to speak up. And not in a lot of the settings, people will not feel safe. If there are 20 people with different ranking and whatever you say, they won't feel safe. One way I've learned to do is to break people into small groups to do something called connection before content. Because if there are three people in a group, it's way safer for people to speak up. So that's in a sense, when you ask people to share, then it's also a little bit more courage because they've already talked about it once in a small group. And then that's what creates connection, because when one person says, I have this hesitation and whatever, and they're like, oh, wow, he spoke up, I can too. Instead of, Andrea, you stood in front of the room, you're the person in front, and you're asking, who has questions and who has concerns? Yeah, I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it. Yeah.
Concerns? Yeah. I don't have concerns. What are you talking about? I'm an architect.
Yeah.
I don't have concerns.
Yeah. And I think one thing for me, maybe it's easier for me to do as a female, is to invite the emotional language in the game. Rebecca said it too about ADR, I think once, talk about emotions. There was one psychologist, Antonio something, he basically discovered that if you take away the emotional center of the brain, people can't make decisions. They can still do chess, but they can't decide what to have for lunch, what to put on to go to work. And so that emotion, so when people are having these things, what are you feeling? What give me one word to tell how you're feeling about this workshop right now. Let's take a break, right?
I had that conversation.
And
there's lots in my book about the emotions of it, because people think, like you say, Xin, right? We think it's a very masculine, factual, intellectual activity, and fundamentally it's like guessing, and we're taking a jump and we're doing what we hope is going to work. People don't do that.
Yeah. So we're I think I can't remember his last name. He said that we are not thinking machines we are not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think. It's very interesting to see it that way.
I think that's a great way,
Yeah.
a great thought to end this episode on, actually, Kenny. That's fantastic. Thanks, Xin, for everything.
Yeah.
That was super interesting. And thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thanks, Kenny and Andrew. And hopefully everybody enjoys listening to all of the information and knowledge and experience and wisdom that Xin shared. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.
Thank you for having me.